guys want to play a guessing game? You got snacks. It's cool. Hey, you guys want to play a guessing game? I'm all right. Okay. I wish I had some prizes.
I'm at this strawberry festival in Ohio, and I'm asking a question that most Americans get wrong.
The CEO of Lowe's, you know, the hardware store, how much more do you think he makes compared to the average Lowe's worker who is helping you find the screwdrivers or whatever?
3 times.
3 times more?
3.
Also 3. Okay. How much more do we think the CEO of McDonald's made than his workers last year?
I'm going to say 9.
The CEO of McDonald's made 1,212 times what his average worker made. 557 times more, 410 times more than the average Home Depot worker.
Regardless of their politics, there's one thing that most Americans agree on. CEOs make way too much money.
I'm a paycheck to paycheck woman. It's not fair. I'm a laundry lady. I make less than 15 an hour.
I was a manager at McDonald's.
Okay, so you've seen it from the inside.
Yep. Unfortunately, yeah.
But it wasn't always this way. If you go back to even just the mid-1960s, CEOs were making about 20 times as much as their workers. Today, that ratio has exploded to 290 times more. So what happened? This is the story of how the wealthy took a weird corporate trick that used to be illegal and used it to supercharge their wealth at the expense of their workers. And why this year, it could get way worse.
Slap them for good luck.
Felix Allen used to work at Lowe's Home Improvement in New Orleans.
I started at $12 an hour. Straight up, there have been people who were alive, you know, when Martin Luther King Jr. was working on the Poor People's Campaign, working at our store, making less than $15 an hour.
Those figures track with what most Lowe's workers make nationwide, about $33,000 a year. The company's CEO made 557 times more in 2023.
And we're going to be great.
One thing that became frustrating pretty quickly was understaffing. Often there were too many customers and not enough people in red vests. You know, it's stressful. It wears on you.
It's not just Lowe's. Workers at Home Depot, CVS, and Starbucks also say that understaffing is endemic nationwide. But all these companies are super profitable. I mean, wouldn't it make sense for them to just have enough staff scheduled on the floor to help their customers? That's just good business, right? Well, it used to be. Let's rewind back to 1979. That's when Lowe's graduated from a single North Carolina hardware store to a nationwide chain with a listing on the New York Stock Exchange. Back then, the CEO of a company like Lowe's basically had 3 options for what to do with their profits. They could put them back into the business, maybe open some new stores, or invest in some fancy inventory software. They might use some of it to reward all of those new shareholders with a payment called a dividend. Maybe they use it to invest in their workers, pay for them to learn a new skill, or at least hire enough of them at a high enough wage to help their existing customers. Or maybe they do a little bit of all 3. Remember this chart? This is the era that we're talking about.
The gap between the average big company CEO and their typical worker was about 25 to 1.
Corporations were largely reinvesting in their innovation process, and in some cases, because of strong unions, paying their workers living wages.
But then something shifted in American corporate culture. It would eventually lead to the explosion of CEO pay that we've seen since then.
It was a complete revolution in the way American companies were run. There's a scene in the 1991 Danny DeVito movie, Other People's Money, that actually does a pretty good job showing this new way of thinking.
Make the stockholders richer. Are you going to liquidate New England Wire and Cable? And if so, what about the people who work here?
Danny DeVito plays a corporate raider who is trying to convince the shareholders of a small New England cable company to sell him their shares so that they can cash out when he liquidates the company.
You invested in a business, and this business is dead. Let's have the intelligence to sign the death certificate to our employees, to our community. What will happen to them? I got 2 words for that. Who cares?
He tells the shareholders that the company has done them wrong by not prioritizing their payouts.
They sucked you dry. And our stock, 1/6 what it was 10 years ago.
DeVito is styled as the kind of lovable villain of this movie, but he actually represents a way of thinking that was taking over American business at the time.
The way that we have thought about the purpose of the corporation since the Reagan Revolution is to make as much money as possible for shareholders.
We're going to turn the bull loose.
I refer to this as shareholder primacy.
In the movie, the shareholders eventually agree to sell to DeVito's character over the objections of the company's CEO. In real life, shareholders found a way to make sure that CEOs always put their interest above everybody else's. Instead of paying CEOs a salary in cash like workers at the rest of the company, start paying them in company stock. The idea spread like wildfire.
Well, if one CEO starts to be paid in this new structure and you see their compensation go up very rapidly, that's going to spread very quickly across the entire ecosystem. It's like keeping up with the Joneses.
Something else happened when CEOs started getting paid in company stock, and it goes a long way towards explaining why companies like Lowe's won't schedule enough workers to help customers, or pay their employees like Felix a living wage. Remember those 3 options that Lowe's and other companies used to have for what to do with their profits? Well, in 1982, right before CEO pay started to really take off, they added a 4th option: buying shares of the company's stock. Here's how it works.
Let's say each share of Lowe's stock sells for $100 on the open market. Then the CEO of Lowe's decides to use some of the company's profits to buy back some of those shares. Now, all of a sudden, with fewer shares remaining, each share is worth a bunch more. Ta-da!
If this is reading to you like some kind of scammy corporate magic trick, you're not wrong.
For much of our history, stock buybacks were illegal.
The lawyers of big companies knew that a company could be accused of manipulating its market price if it went ahead and did stock buybacks.
That changed when Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980 on a platform of deregulation, and he picked a Wall Street executive to be the head of the SEC. And that SEC chair decided that allowing stock buybacks would help companies that wanted to enrich their executives and their shareholders without really having to do anything to improve their performance.
The Schoolhouse Rock theory of investing holds that in order for a company's stock price to go up, they have to actually do something, like increasing their pollution. I mean, their sales.
Looks as if their sales are going up sky high. Better call my broker and tell him to buy.
But with buybacks, corporations can raise their stock price without actually doing anything. I mean, just put yourself in the shoes of the Lowe's CEO. Nearly 80% of your annual pay is in company stock, and you get a $3 million bonus if the stock price hits a certain level.
Your workers created nearly $7 billion in profits last year.
What do you do with the money? Use it to make a bunch of your part-time workers full-time so they can help customers? Gotta pay the shareholders their dividends. Don't want to get fired. Use it to pay your employees a living wage so they stick with the company longer. Or use it to do a massive stock buyback, which literally makes the shares that you own worth more and ensures that you get that $3 million bonus.
Why wouldn't they? If you put an incentive structure in place where CEOs legally manipulate the market price of the stock that directly and indirectly affects their own compensation, why wouldn't they?
They can inflate their own paychecks without having to do anything to improve company performance.
Stock buybacks are a huge reason why the pay gap between CEOs and their workers jumped in the 80s and 90s and has stayed high ever since.
You've seen consistently companies like Lowe's or Walmart or Starbucks where workers have been organizing. They have billions of dollars going out the door in stock buybacks. They say they cannot afford to pay their workers even a very, very low basic wage.
They're literally buying back their own stocks. I mean, it's hard for me to understand, but it's clear that if they're doing that, they got some coin to throw around, and they're getting paid however many hundreds of dollars per hour. And yet, you know, my coworker who has worked at Lowe's for 20 years is making less than 15. I mean, it's almost like laughable. It's obviously incredibly offensive.
When companies started paying their CEOs in stock, it helped kickstart a massive nationwide transfer of wealth from workers to CEOs and shareholders. More recently, that wealth transfer has gone into overdrive thanks to one specific law.
Another huge turning point was the 2017 tax reform.
The biggest tax cut, biggest reform of all time.
Now, as Trump and the Republicans are working overtime to make these tax cuts permanent in his big, beautiful bill, it's easy to see how it'll supercharge this wealth transfer from workers to CEOs, because we already have all the evidence.
The biggest giveaway in that 2017 reform was the slashing of the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%.
This change gave corporations a huge amount of cash to throw around.
Company leaders promised that they would use their windfalls from that tax cut and funnel it almost immediately into workers' hands through wage increases and bonuses.
Where you're going to start seeing a lot more money in your paycheck.
Well, what happened after that bill was passed? A handful of companies gave some modest bonuses, but then that was it.
Can you guess what they did instead?
It's not just a big year for earnings, it's a big year for
buybacks. Are expected to hit a record $1 trillion this year.
Companies announcing big share buyback programs along with their earnings reports.
Of course, the irony of it being named the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is that very, very little of these savings went to the workforce. Many people, including myself, were predicting that we would see buybacks as a main way that companies were utilizing the gains, but we saw it in levels that I didn't even expect.
It really changed the norm for stock buyback spending.
When we did a big tax cut, and when they took the money and did buybacks, that's not building a hangar, that's not buying aircraft, that's not doing the kind of things that I want them to do. We didn't think we would have had to restrict it because we thought they would have known better.
Clearly, they don't know better. And even if we take Trump at his word here that he didn't know companies were going to do all these buybacks with their tax savings, it raises a really important question. Why is he about to run the exact same play? Trump's big, beautiful bill gives corporations another massive tax cut, but it doesn't put any limits on buybacks or tax them more aggressively, which was something that one of his own cabinet members, Marco Rubio, floated back in 2019.
We do want to create a preference for reinvesting it back into your business to increase productivity, innovation.
And do you want to guess why Rubio's buybacks tax isn't on the table this time around? Because days after he merely suggested it, Wall Street investors and their protectors in Congress threw a proper little fit. One investment advisor told CNBC it was part of a war on wealth. Another called it an attack on democracy in a Financial Times op-ed.
I'm not sure what the problem is we're trying to solve here. Yes, there have been stock buybacks too. I just don't get this, the alarm over a perfectly normal, healthy aspect of a market economy.
Legislators saying we know better how to deploy corporate capital than the managers in the business.
Fast forward 6 years, and there is not one peep of buybacks opposition among Republicans. So that's the story of how CEOs ransacked America's corporations and took everything for themselves. It used to be a literal crime, now it's just business as usual. And it's no wonder that so many Americans feel that the politicians who let this happen aren't representing them.
Do y'all feel comfortable sharing who you voted for in the last presidential election?
Didn't vote. Didn't like the choice.
Didn't vote.
If you had a candidate that was running on a platform of capping CEO pay, would you have voted?
Probably.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, let them know what it's like for us regular people.
I didn't vote for a president.
If there was a presidential candidate out here talking about capping CEO pay at, I think what you said, like 3, 4, 5 times, would you support that candidate?
Yes.
It's not something that you hear politicians talk about a lot. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, the big donors, a lot of previous politicians, their wives, their families that are all capitalizing off of this money. There's a whole lot of votes out there available for purchase.
But you think that like regular folks, people who are working for a living, Yeah.
Yeah. I would definitely vote for a president like that.
Thank you so much for watching our video. If you'd like to see more stories like this, be sure to like and subscribe to get more Perfect Union in your feed. And if you have ideas for stories we should investigate, drop them in the comments below.